Penny is the author of Fracking Capitalism and a member of Frack of Glasgow. Penny will be speaking today about the economics and politics of fracking, including how these issues are shaping up in America and how that affects England and Scotland. And last we have Highland Green MSP John Finnie. He'll be speaking about the political aspects of fracking and what the Scottish Green Party have planned in the fight against fracking in Scotland. I set up Highlands and Islands Against Fracking as I believe that although there will be no fracking in the Highlands, all the residents should stand up with the Central Belt groups offering solidarity and support. By the means of lobbying MPs and MSPs, petitions to Holyrood and offering greater numbers of protests. We have to stand up as a whole country and say no to fracking, be it to Westminster or Holyrood. Scotland doesn't want fracking, and just because it's in the Central Belt, we should not bother to sit back and let it happen. This failing industry will have an effect on everyone in Scotland. It will affect the economy, environment, tourism and agriculture, not to mention human health risk. Fracking is a progressive technology and represents the past, not the future, and we should be investing in renewable energy. We need to help others, not just in Scotland, but the UK, oppose this practice. And now I'd like to welcome up Barry Dalgleish.
I don't know much about fracking, but I'll just try and give you a bit of background on it. There's different types of unconventional gas, but fracking is probably the method that's been most publicised and most talked about. Basically, it involves injecting a mixture of water and chemicals at high pressure underground into shale rock. That causes cracks to form in the rock, and that releases the gas, which is then collected and piped around the country. And that's the sort of system that we have in America. There's also another couple of forms of unconventional gas, such as coal and methane, which is probably likely to be the most predominant type of unconventional gas, certainly in the Central Belt and other parts. That basically involves taking water out of coal seams. That reduces the pressure in the coal seams, and that releases the gas, which is then collected. There's also another form of unconventional gas, which is starting to gain attraction. That's underground coal gasification. That involves quite literally setting fire to coal seams underground. So there's proposals to do that under the Firth of Forth. You'll probably know already that the main focal point in Scotland at the moment is in the earth near Falkirk. Dark Energy has had an advanced drilling proposal there, but that's been held back by local opposition. And at the moment the thing's ongoing, we're just waiting for final information to come through on the Scottish planning framework and how that would actually affect unconventional gas extraction. So that's likely to come to fruition at some point next year. It's difficult to put a date on it, but some people think it might actually be after the election next May. Well, let's go back to fracking. I don't know a great deal about what the situation is here in the Fort William area, but I think the proposal is there might be a possibility of local fracking rigs being set up. I think there's possibly shale gas, shale rock deposits in the general area. I think that you probably have more local knowledge than what I do. I'll just try and give you a wee bit more background about the fracking process. Basically, the mixture that is pumped down is roughly about 90% water and 2% chemicals. Over in the States, it's difficult to pinpoint just exactly what chemicals are being used because it's all basically hushed up, kept quiet. To keep the crack cracks open once the shale rock is fractured. They use a propping agent, use sand to keep the cracks open, that allows the gas to come out. When you actually do fracking, you're not talking about a single well, you're talking about multiple wells. Usually fracking operations occur in the form of well pads, which have at least 6 wells on it, so it's a massive, it's actually quite an industrial operation. And in order to make fracking viable in the UK, you're going to be talking about something like 3,000 plus wells, just to sort of try and make it viable. It's an ongoing process. Fracking is very water intensive. A single well could use between, it's estimated, 2,500 and 2,000 cubic metres of water. An actual well pad, depending on how many wells are actually involved. You might be looking at about 55,000 to about 175,000 cubic metres of water, so it's a huge amount of water. I don't know if anybody's seen the film Gasland. There's been 2 films made, Gasland 1, Gasland 2. One of the sort of poignant scenes in the film is quite literally seeing hundreds of trucks going back and forward from areas where fracking's taking place. So that has the potential to have quite a lot of impact in the local infrastructure.
Is that trucks full of water again?
Trucks full of water, trucks full of chemicals. They actually mix the chemicals on site. They have mixing vats on site where they mix the chemicals so they can pump it down. So you're talking about hundreds of trucks going back and forward. That has impacts on the roads. These are one of the things that they don't tell you about, the fact that they cut up the roads. You're talking about massive road repairs as well and so on. So when they're actually collecting the gas, get what's known as flowback, where they have to pump the stuff back out again. So they have to store that somewhere. So we've got storage tanks on site where they keep this stuff. And it's pretty impossible to purify completely. Even if you took it to an advanced purifying plant, it'd be really difficult to purify it, and the actual final solution would still be toxic. Here in the UK, they say that the regulations are more advanced, but whatever way you look at it, you're still talking about toxic chemicals like benzene, and I can't remember them all offhand, but a lot of them are toxic, cancer-inducing, and when you're pumping back stuff back up again, you're also taking out around natural occurring radioactive materials as well. That's coming to the surface. So you've got the potential of the flowback fluid being partially radioactive, because underground you get deposits of radon and various other radioactive materials as well. So there's a potential for pollution pathways and contamination risks, particularly if you rely on groundwater. Down south in England, they rely a great deal on groundwater for water supply and so on. So there is the potential there for contamination. The argument is that it is possible to drill safely. The jury's out in that. It might be possible to drill safely, but one of the problems that surfaced over the States is that if you are drilling, you have to protect the well by building a well casing around the well. That involves pumping cement down into the actual well and making sure that it's sealed from the surrounding rock. But quite often that's actually failed. And when Cardrilla drilled near Blackpool a few years ago, caused a couple of earthquakes. One of the things that they discovered was that the well casing cracked because of the earthquakes. So there's a lot of uncertainty involved in drilling, and that's why organisations such as Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth are so concerned about it. It's a relatively new operation, and it's impossible to regulate completely against it, and that's the general view that environmental groups are taking. There's also the possibility of what happens when you've finished fracking a well. Also, you end up with what's called stranded assets. Who's going to pay to clean up the mess that's been left behind after the exploration that is actually taking place? So that kind of gives you a wee bit of a background of some of the risks involved and the techniques involved in fracking. Give you a sort of very brief historical viewpoint on it as well. If you go back to the United States, in 2005, fracking really started to take off all over the States. One of the main production areas is the so-called Marcellus Shale in the northwest United States. That's where Pennsylvania is located, which is one of the most heavily fracked states over America. And basically, they were able to do that because of political intervention via the Bush administration, and it came about through a little legal loophole called the Halliburton loophole. It was the company Halliburton that pioneered the fracking technique, or hydraulic fracturing to give it its proper phrase. They enabled the process, the sideways drilling process, which allows fracking to take place. You can actually drill a well, you can actually frack a well several times. You can sort of drill down in one direction and another direction, and also either like the spokes on a bicycle wheel, where you can frack a well several times. So the typical lifespan of a well is between 5-7 years. So you can put that to a lifetime. And basically, the Halliburton loophole took place because of the exemption in the 2005 Energy Act, which came out over the States. Some of the acts that were actually exempt was the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Planning and Community Right to Know Act. So it's pretty much, if the law gets in the way, the regulations get in the way, just take them away. And that's precisely what we're seeing happening over here. We're seeing the UK government basically deregulate the whole process. Greenpeace started a campaign called Not for Shale, and that involves bringing to bear the trespass law, which means that if a fracking company was going to drill under somebody's house, the owner could object against it, saying that they were trespassing. So I've got a couple of leaflets there that tells you a bit about it. But recently, that regulation has been undermined. As far as I recall, there was a thing that went through the House of Lords recently, and that basically overturned the Trespassing Act. So I think the situation now is that drilling companies have got carte blanche to pretty much do what they like. But organisations like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth will continue to challenge the system as it stands. So that's pretty much the way things stand just now. So thanks very much for hearing me out. Any questions? I'll try my best to answer them.
Anyone get any questions for Maddie?
I might be mistaken here, but I thought there was no trespass law in Scotland. That was a civil rather than a criminal matter, and that anyone could go anywhere as long as it caused no harm.
Yeah, I think there is a difference between Scotland and England. You're not too clear on the law in that respect. I know Fred and Air Scotland recently introduced a similar move to Greenpeace, where they asked people to sign up a petition, utilising basically the same principle. So I'm not 100% clear in how the law differs between England and Scotland. I think there is some similar between them.
You're right to say that there actually is a trespass law still in the statute books. 1856, I think it comes from. It talks about setting fires and things like that. There is, of course, the right to roam, and the two don't necessarily conflict. It's about a balance.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was hearing in the media a lot. I mean, there's been a bit of a propaganda blitz recently with this stuff. And I'm just wondering what you feel about it. They seem to be pushing this idea that there's going to be these manufacturing jobs that are appearing and it's going to suddenly revitalise local economies. Is there any evidence of that in places where this is going on?
Yeah, well, certainly when the process started up in the United States, there was a lot of talk about reduced loads of jobs and so on. But the fact is, the people who work in the fracking industry are usually highly specialised and skilled people with specific qualifications. So there's really a limit to the amount of jobs that you can actually create. So I think a lot of the job projections are pretty much overstated. So it'll be the same over here. We're looking at specialised people coming in to do the jobs, and certainly I think in the States there's actually a high demand for skilled workers to work in the fracking industry. A lot of specialised people have been coming from other industries and moving into the fracking industry because they offer such high wage rates, because there's actually a shortage of the right people, to get involved in the industry, So I think we'll probably see the same thing.
That's people coming from outside.
It could well happen. We might actually see people coming over from the States to work over there. As I recall, I think that's what happened in the North Sea oil industry. Took off. There's a lot of experts coming in from the States, overseeing what was actually going on in the North Sea.
Okay. Just before Penny speaks, I just want to make some points quickly. I was at the Radical Independence Conference 2 weeks ago, and I was at the Stop Fracking Now workshop. There was a speaker there called Professor Andrew Watterson, and he's a Professor of Health at Stirling Uni. He pointed out that 25 years ago, WHO produced a European Charter on Environment and Health outlining the individual's rights and the employer and governmental responsibilities. Individual rights that are mentioned are that you should have an environment conducive to the highest level of health and well-being, and you should get information about it. Principles of public policy with regard to environment and health is that prevention is better than cure. And the health of every individual, especially those in vulnerable and high-risk groups, should be protected. And new technology should be introduced with prudence and not before a prior assessment of potential environmental and health impacts have occurred. And that has not been happening. I would have had a slide, but the thing's not working. The number of Scottish NHS bodies that have conducted health impact assessments of unconventional gas is 0. Number of Scottish Government departments that have conducted independent public health impact assessments of unconventional gas is 0. Number of proper baseline public health studies in Scottish areas where unconventional gas may be developed is 0. Number of full UG public health impacts assessments in the UK is 0. Number of chemicals that have been used to extract unconventional gas, 637. Number of US gas extraction chemicals that have been publicly disclosed in the UK, 0. Number of UG extraction chemicals independently reviewed, 353. Out of these, 25% were carcinogens and mutagens, and 37% were endocrine disruptors. I've just got a description of the carcinogens in fracking fluid. Lead, nathapoline, carcinogen found in mothballs, sulfuric acid, crystine silica, and formaldehyde. Also, endocrine disruptors interfere with the body's endocrine system, produce adverse developmental, reproductive, and neurological and immune effects in humans and wildlife. Toluene is an aromatic hydrocarbon that is widely used as industrial feedstock and a solvent. Bisphenol A, BPA, is employed to make certain plastics and epoxy paints. There's a big one, DEHP for short. It's used as a plasticizer. Other threats to public health. Fracking is also linked to other diseases and disorders that from the relatively minor, such as rashes, nosebleeds, joint pain and headaches, or to more serious disorders such as breathing difficulties, memory loss and intestinal problems. One study found that 75% of chemicals used can affect the skin, eyes and other sensory organs, respiratory system and gastrointestinal system, and more than half can affect the brain and nervous system. One study also linked fracking to congenital heart defects and neural tube defects in newborn babies. Penny is the co-author of Fracking Capitalism, Action Plans for the Eco-Social Crisis. This book is an essential resource for anyone engaged in fighting the fracking menace, and it takes apart the arguments for fracking and shows that it's linked to a capitalist economy that threatens us all, and shows us how the movement can fight and win. And therefore, I'd like to introduce my quote.
Forgive me for sitting down because I finished my talk. I've been up to my ears, so I finished my talk on the train, so I'm going to have to talk from my laptop. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. I want to look at two areas particularly. And the first is, I'd like to make the point that unconventional oil and gas extraction is not an ordinary, everyday industry or business. And the second point which I'll come to is that it throws up big questions about democracy and human rights and the way in which decisions are taken. So first of all, the reason why I say that the drive for unconventional gas in the UK is not an ordinary business is because, in my view, it is a state-corporate joint project. And the state is putting all its resources behind the corporations, including government departments staffed by civil servants and policemen whose wages we pay. In the autumn statement this week, the Chancellor announced another £5 million of public money for more propaganda to convince us that fracking is dangerous. They're going to build a research centre in Scotland to study the geological and other impacts, and they've given substantial money for innovation in unconventional gas extraction, all our money. And in the autumn statement, not one single penny for renewables, which are being left to the mercy of the market. The government gave a £250 million loan guarantee to INEOS at Grangemouth to build the world's biggest storage tank for fracked gas, being held in the form of liquid petroleum, and more of that later. So why is the government so desperate to promote and facilitate and fund fracking? Well, in my view, this is because of the state of the economy. In the first year of the Condon government, when the economy was teetering on the edge of collapse, investors did not know where to put their money to get a profit. And at the same time, the government itself was printing money hand over fist in quantitative easing. And where was that money to go to earn a profit? One answer was the London property market, which was fueled up yet again. And fracking is another hole for this hot money. George Osborne came back from a visit to Wall Street practically slavering, and his father-in-law, Lord Brown, formerly of BP and a leading proponent of fracking, was slavering along with him. And within months, the condemned government had ended the fracking moratorium that had been introduced by the new Labour government in light of the earthquakes at Blackpool, and declared that fracking was the way forward. And the truth is that the fossil fuel industry has totally penetrated the government through advisors and lobbying. Every advisor knowledgeable about renewables has been sacked from the Department of Climate Change. The Department of Energy and Climate Change, which should be renamed the Department for Promoting Climate Change, and they've been replaced with fossil fuel lobbyists. And the big lie was then put forward that higher standards of regulation in Britain would mean that fracking was safe in the UK. But there is absolutely no evidence of this, and the government's own review admits, because the government's actually done a public health review, not that they've publicised it particularly, but it admits that it's impossible to quantify the public health risks of fracking. Estimates of the number of jobs fracking will create have veered between 700 and hundreds of thousands in the government's propaganda. The quoted reserves of fracked potential gas are being grossly exaggerated, and the issue is not just the amount that's present, but the amount that can be extracted. And the British Geological Survey, which has been commissioned to do the surveys of these deposits, make this point over and over again, that there's a big difference between what's down there and what you can get out. And this is underlined by the experience in the United States. The thing about shale is it suffers from the law of diminishing returns. Wells experience severe rates of depletion. The industry claims that wells will operate for 30 to 40 years, but the average depletion rate in the Bakken Shale, which is the big shale Dakota stretches for a number of states, and it's
America,
in America, yeah, and it is the largest tight oil, that's what they call shale gas, tight oil play in the US. And the depletion was 69% in the first year. So if you take the start of production, it comes out fast, lots of gas comes out. In 1 year, it had gone from that high point, and it had gone down 69%, and 94% over the first 5 years. So this steep rate of depletion means a frantic pace of drilling just to offset the decline. So at the Bakken Shale, they have to drill 7,200 new gas wells every year at a cost of over $42 billion just to maintain the current levels of production. So, and because the most productive well locations are drilled first, it's likely that what happens is that the drilling rates and the costs increase as time goes on, because you get the easy stuff, then you've got to get the stuff that's hard to get, so it costs more and more to get it out. So there's a lot of concern and worry now about the financial stability of this whole process. And a big investment broker, Panmure Gordon, this week said that as far as they're concerned, the fracking industry is drowning in debt, and it can only get worse because fracking's expensive. If you're in an oil well in Saudi Arabia, you drill down in the ground and the stuff just comes out, But this is difficult and expensive to extract. So it's only profitable. It's only profitable when the oil price is high, right? But the global oil price has fallen by 40% since June this year, and it's currently about $65 a barrel. Now, for fracking to be profitable, it has to be producing between $60 and $80 a barrel. And that's not taking into account the massive amount of debt that these fracking companies got themselves into in order to set up operations. So the whole thing is teetering on the verge of collapse in the United States, and it's not an accident. When the OPEC the oil producing companies met 10 days ago to discuss what was the impact of this falling oil price on them and should they cut production in order to drive the price back up. They agreed not to do it. Why? Because they want to drive the competition out of business, and the competition is expensive shale oil and gas from the United States. So, what we're talking about is the normal, ruthless, disastrous, catastrophic operations of the capitalist system. So, it's not to say that the oil price won't rebound, of course it could do that. But the point is that this is a business that's about profit and finance and not about secure energy supplies. So, on that basis, the falling oil price and so on, you have to ask, why is anybody interested in the UK's very limited reserves and the Scottish even more limited reserves? And the answer is that those who get in quick, the Goldman Sachs, HSBCs, Barclays Investment Bank, will make money from lending at high rates to oil companies. And the companies that get in at the start will make money too. And then, as in the United States, there will be a wave of bankruptcies, mergers, takeovers, leaving a handful of big drillers to mop up what's left and leave the mess for us to deal with when the wells are spent. I just want to go on to say that, we in Scotland are absolutely at the forefront of this issue. The plan is to make Grangemouth the European Centre for fracked gas. And this is not a Westminster plan, as some people are claiming. There is an influential group in Scottish industry, academia and government who are entirely in favour of this. Only the Green Party in the Scottish Parliament is against fracking. Lord Smith of Calvin, before he became Lord Smith of Devolution, said that Scotland should aim to be the European fracking hub. Now, why was he giving his opinion? Well, because he is the former chairman of the Weir Group, and the Weir Group is the biggest producer of pumps for the fracking industry in the United States and elsewhere. And they have a vested interest, as the fracking industry peaks and declines in the United States, they have a vested interest in getting fracking going in new places so they can sell more pumps, basically. And in fact, it's interesting, a recent article called the Weir Group, and particularly their subsidiary in the United States, a canary in the coal mine for the health of the US fracking industry, because the Weir Group's share price has started to fall after having boomed along with the United States shale boom. And this week, the same Lord Smith became chairman of 4 ports, which includes ports at Grangemouth and at Tilbury, an ideal opportunity to export fracked gas in the form of liquid petroleum from the base at Grangemouth to markets in the southeast of England. So, obviously, INEOS, Grangemouth, INEOS, they want, Jim Ratcliffe, the owner of INEOS, says, I want INEOS to be the biggest player in the UK shale industry. I believe shale gas could revolutionise UK manufacturing, and I know that INEOS has the resources to make it happen. Only if we give them the resources right enough, in the terms of loan guarantees and all the rest of it, and no strike deals on the part of the workers at INEOS, but, So, and they've got a partnership with a Chinese state-owned company, and they've bought 4 giant ships to bring fracked gas to Grangemouth. And here's another point. The people in America have benefited from a collapsing oil price. Their fuel bills are really cheap, been cheap for a number of years because of this cheap gas that's been coming out. But, of course, what's happened now is, when they started out fracking in the States, they had no infrastructure to export it. So it was all being sold in the US market. So prices in the US market were coming down. Some of us who are old enough to remember when North Sea gas came out on stream in the UK, exactly the same thing happened. The gas price came down. But of course, now they've put in the infrastructure and pipelines and a big base in Oakland in California to start exporting the stuff, the price will go up because it will come up to meet the world market price and benefit, which is exactly what happened with North Sea gas. As soon as the Thatcher government liberalised the market and allowed the gas to be sold on the world market, our gas prices started to rise. The stuff was dragged out of the ground as fast as possible, sold off as fast as possible for a profit, and now we have to import gas when we could have been self-sufficient. Okay, so INEOS, having decided to be the big importer of shale gas, might as well be the biggest fracker in the UK as well. So they've bought 127 square mile area around Grangemouth in the Firth of Forth. They've got 51% of the licence to frack there. PEDL, it's called 133, which covers the Midland Valley. And they have also bought up an 80% share of a licence covering 400 square kilometres of the Midland Valley. They bought that from Reach, which is a small company, Coal Seam Gas. They're the ones who are hoping to drill in Cumbernauld. Literally in Cumbernauld, by the way. Not quite in the middle, but actually in the town. On a Scottish water site, believe it or not. So, and they're interested in fracking because the gas would provide useful feedstock for their gas cracker at Grangemouth, and also a useful raw material for they've got a big, huge chemical plant in Runcorn in Cheshire. So INEOS is huge. It's the world's third largest chemical company, believe it or not. It's massive. They've got a refinery in China. They've got stuff all over the place. But it's extremely indebted. In 2011, its net debt was 6.3 billion euros, while its cash balance was 1.2 billion. Sounds like highly leveraged, as they would say in the city. And they got into debt, and the British government wanted them to pay their VAT bill. So they said, no, we're not going to pay our VAT bill because we just can't afford to. So the government said, well, everyone has to pay their VAT. And they said, right, we're moving to Switzerland. And in order to do that, they had to get permission from their bankers, the people they owed the money to. And who were their bankers? RBS, Lloyds. Who owns them? We do. We own those banks. We bailed them out. It's our money that's keeping those banks afloat. And the Treasury must have tacitly agreed to allow them to get out of Britain and not pay any taxes. So that's the kind of people and the kind of networks of people in Scotland, networks, corporate, state and academic. I can explain that later if anyone's interested. Interests. So the Scottish government says it will support fracking with strict environmental controls. But it's also clear that SEPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is not geared up to implement these controls. Their evidence to the Falkirk inquiry was full of errors and extremely weak. It showed a weak understanding of the processes that were involved. They admitted that they had been going to sign off on the DART application without even seeing what the details of what was to be processed and the content of the waste that would be produced. And that was though the planning application for DART had been around for almost a year. And this was at the public inquiry in Falkirk. They really had nothing to say. So, and in fact, if it hadn't been for the people in Falkirk against unconventional gas, putting forward their point of, challenging this and demanding the inquiry, it wouldn't have happened. They would have got away with it. They would have gone ahead. So that brings me really to the second point, which is about democracy. And it's about who rules, really. Who rules us? And on whose behalf are we governed? And the truth is that the British corporate state, which includes New Labour, by the way, is prepared to manipulate laws, some of them going back thousands of years to remove our right to say what happens in our communities. They've offered bribes to local authorities and devolved parliaments and given inflated estimates of employment. The courts have lined up. People at Balcombe in Sussex yesterday heard that they failed in their judicial review of Quadrilla's plans to frack in the leafy stockbroker belt of Sussex. And the judge awarded punitive costs against the community group. And the secret state is also being mobilised. The police have been acting like private security at drill sites, though their wages are being paid by the taxpayers that they're arresting. Sussex police have admitted that they used what they call covert human intelligence sources to spy on the Balkan protesters. That means they put agents into the protest movement to find out what was happening. And they also admitted using electronic interception, that is bugging phones and monitoring emails. So I'm just warn and say, if new people join your group and they want to take the protests onto a more extreme or violent or illegal level, they're probably police plans. Don't trust them. So alongside the British state's commitment to fracking, there's the international state. You could say the quasi-state-like structures that enable the rule of global capital, and they're also all out for fracking. This transatlantic trade and investment agreement, which Barry's got some information about, will allow companies to sue governments that try to stop them fracking. They can take them to an unelected, private, secret court run by other business people and sue the French government for not allowing them to frack in France. So what it adds up to is that the interests of the people and the environment are being sacrificed to this Gadarene rush for short-term profit. So what are we going to do about it? And this ties into my own view, this is my own view and the view of the World to Win, about the challenge we face in Scotland beyond the referendum. You know, our human global reality that we have to face is that we can't change the nature of capitalism. Greening capitalism has proved to be a lost cause, and in fact, environmental destruction is becoming more extreme the deeper the system's crisis gets. So the only way to defend the ecosystem is by transforming the corporate market state into a people's democracy. And we need to challenge the authority of profit-driven corporations to decide everything in society. A new system of democracy and law has to be based on a very different understanding of our human relationship with nature. Because capitalism is underpinned not only by the state-backed framework of law, but also by an ideology of humanity as the controller of nature, which exists solely as a repository of material for extraction and transformation into commodities, which can then be sold for profit. And capitalism has co-opted our governing systems. I refuse to say they've co-opted our democracy, because we have no democracy. They've co-opted our governments to serve their ends. And as workers and consumers, we are also drawn into the destruction of our own ecosystem. You know, we need the tax to pay for welfare, we need the jobs, all these arguments that are put forward. And in this way, human relations to each other and to nature become alienated, reified, turned into a thing and commodified. And I think that's a major source of unhappiness, mental ill health and desperation across the globe. But as we show here today, and all the fantastic groups that have grown up over Scotland over the last, they had a meeting in Bishopbriggs 2 weeks ago about fracking. 200 people turned up. And it's the same everywhere that it's happening. Because we continue to struggle against these damaged relations, because our ideal of nature, our intuition, and our sense of what is right and wrong, the gas, and then take the gas and pump it into underground spent oil coal fields or oil fields. And Scotland, the Scottish government, decided that this was a very potentially lucrative field to be an regard, so they've been very keen to get funding from the British government to be the leading light of carbon capture and storage, which is completely unproven. And I read an article by Stuart Highlands which said the Scottish government had just after this was a very potentially British lucrative field to be regard, so they've been very keen to get funding from the British government to be the leading light of carbon capture and storage, which is completely unproven. And I read an article by Stuart Heseltine which said just after the British Geological Survey came out saying, actually, there's really not a lot of shale gas around in Scotland. Can't really see the point. He came and he wrote an article, he said, well, yes, this is true. It's true, but it's still worth fracking it because it could act as a sort of bridge the gap as we finally get renewables on the streets. So there is a group of academics, very influential, and they are making, the government is referring to them. The Scottish government kept saying, we will not make the decision until we've heard from our independent advisory group. And of course, not surprisingly, the independent advisory group said, yeah, I know. As long as there are strict environmental controls, it will be fine. So that's why I say this academic group. We're all in it together. Yeah.
I agree with the chap at the front. This, being able to say facts to people when you're talking about things. Is there any chance that you can put your talk onto the website Mary set up, perhaps, so we can refer to it? And also a question: is it true that the government recently slipped through something that said they put aside £5 million to publicly reassure people that fracking was not dangerous?
Yeah, that's right, as I mentioned in my talk.
Did you, sorry?
That's only one of many bits of public money they've invested in these shenanigans. Yeah.
Also, have you got any opinion about how we can involve, how people can be interested in this issue? Because, for example, my husband's family are from South Wales, inland South Wales, where the earth has already been extensively mined. My mother and father-in-law involved in anti-fracking campaign there, and there are about 5 of them in the group. They've got big posters all over the place. It looks like there's more, but they were really quite didn't know how to feel or how to put it, that nobody was really being interested in the idea of fracking in the area and encountering it, because there's so many more issues now for everybody to be concerned with in their day-to-day life.
Well, I mean, there was a big protest camp in Wales. Actually, it was broken up by the police last week. So, there is a movement in Wales, quite an extensive one, which, again, if they get onto the Frackoff website, they list all the local groups on that website.
Oh yeah, they have made the local groups.
Yeah. So there is a
these
movement
local
in
groups
Wales.
are very small. They might be quite vocal, but obviously in South Wales the land is already very fragile because of the mining that was done there extensively.
It's the same here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same all across the central belt. I mean, where I live on the south side of Glasgow, when you buy a flat, you have to get a mine report, a mine work. I was looking at this, I said, what's this mine working report thing? Apparently the whole place is on, mine working, some of them that go back to the Middle Ages. In fact, our lovely community garden is built on a place, an empty space, where a whole tenement once completely fell down. This is deeply worrying. But, the whole central belt of Scotland is riddled with mine workings. And this idea that you can, pump the gas out, it will all come out and bubble up and it'll all be fine. They've no idea where this gas is going to come out. There's, shafts, mine shafts all over Lanarkshire and into Fife and so on.
Yeah, I think what my mother-in-law was saying was that people, there's benefit cuts, dismantling of the NHS, little housing. People are really concerned with lots of things that are going on in their lives. and maybe to make the connection of fracking will in the future be more problem, is a secondary concern to them because it's not in their face. You see what I mean? So how to make people really see that this is really a substantial thing that is creeping up and is going to hit everybody in the face really soon.
Well, I can only say what my own view is.
Yeah.
And my view is that we shouldn't separate any of these things from each other, because they all have the same source. And the source is the profound lack of democracy and the fact that we live in a crisis-ridden system which is riding roughshod over our rights and our lives in so many ways that you can't separate. I wouldn't even attempt to separate fracking off from all these other issues. I believe we need assemblies, and we saw the beginnings of that in the referendum campaign, where people came together and, as one of the speakers at the Radical Independence Conference from Aberdeen said, she said, what we saw happening was a new politics emerging that transcended political parties and was, the people themselves beginning to talk about their future. And I think that's what we need. And the fracking thing can only be dealt with in the whole context of it. Because they'll hit us hard with all this propaganda about jobs. There's no question. They'll say, if you don't accept it, INEOS will, we won't get all these wonderful jobs that INEOS are going to create, by destroying the central belt, the most populated central belt. We're going to have to look at it as a whole. That's only my view.
I agree with you, but this is really radical.
I agree. I am extremely radical, and I don't think any of you will have missed that.
I think it has to be radical.
Yeah.
I think the only thing truthful about Jim Ratcliffe is the rant in his name, actually. And that's the way he treated the workers at Greenpeace, prepared to close the whole plant, all out of work, just for his principles.
Yes.
And now you see him moving into this, his brand of capitalism is what is destroying this planet.
And his workers are paying their taxes. He certainly is not. He's not paying any taxes in Britain.
No, it's outrageous that he has, the resources and the funds and the influence that he has on these politicians. It's like you couldn't make it up. You could not make it up.
Gangsters.
Is the workers constantly well under threat as well? Any little thing that goes well.
No, it's just to treat people like that says everything about them.
Maybe.
Just leave it to them. I'm back. Thanks to Penny for that speech. Another quick point I'd like to make about the Stop Fracking Now workshop was Janet Moxley. She's an environmental scientist and a member of the Scottish Green Party. Now Janet touched on the issues about how these energy companies treat their workers and outlined that INEOS has the worst track record. She also pointed out that land near Erith belongs to BP, is that right? And the land at Canopy owned by Buckla Estates.
Bucklew, the richest man in Britain.
She was saying that a lot of the people are being affected by it, being threatened with losing their houses and farms if they object to it. And she also mentioned that SEPA have suffered 20% cutbacks over the last several years, and SEPA doesn't have boreholes set up for monitoring groundwater. They use they use boreholes already there, and they're not systematically arranged for monitoring these new sites. She was saying about Canopy, the nearest SEPA monitoring site is 20 miles away on the other side of Gretna, and no one is sure what way the water in that aquifer flows and which way the pollution would go. She pointed out that you need tight regulation by public bodies, not the energy companies, and proper restoration bonds so that these companies are responsible for any mess left. Monitoring background levels before the work starts. If there's no monitoring, these companies will just say it was there already. And they should monitor these sites for 1 to 2 years before the company, 1 to 2 years, and the company should pay for background level tests. And there should be no tax breaks for these companies. She also mentioned that we should be getting out to communities and having public meetings like this and lobbying MPs and MSPs. I've done that myself with the Highlands. I've had a few replies. Fergus Ewing's for it with restrictions. John Thurston, the MP for Caithness, is for it. MSP Rob Gibson is against it. He's SNP. Jamie McGregor is for it. Mary Scanlon is for it, and Jean Ufford is against it. John Finnie.
Well, Jessica Marveladunya, good afternoon everyone. Thanks very much. Can I first of all thank Mary, because I think this is exactly what we need. We need public intent. It's done a lot of work and it's been very well received in the social media. Indeed, just as we started there, I checked Twitter and a gentleman from a councillor, an SNP councillor from Murray, was asking how it came about, because they like one there, like a meeting there. So I'll give you these contact details later. Now, I should say that I'm an independent MSP who's a member of the Green Party, so I'm not here speaking on behalf of the Green Party, but I don't think I'm going to say anything that would remotely offend my colleagues in any way. And in any case, for the last 2+ years, I have been a member of the Independent Green Group at Parliament. Now, maybe since we have a gentleman from the Open Times with us, I'm certainly not aware of any immediate plans relating to Loch Harbour, but of course it doesn't mean that it's not a Highland issue, and I'll speak later about an area of the Highlands that has been identified and licence been issued. I have to say, both Barry and Penny, whose talks I very much enjoyed, have covered a lot of what's in these notes I have here, so I don't intend duplicating, but I may just try and reinforce some of the points. And the very first thing that I had written down was decisions taken in the exclusive interests of citizens. Well, clearly if your name's Lord Smith, then a lot of decisions are taken in your interest. And if you are Clue Estates, I was tweeting this week the freedom of information that was produced by one of published by one of the papers, I think the Guardian, about the recipients of Common Agricultural Fund monies. The Britannic Majesty's got a lot of money, the Duke of Arthur got a lot of money, and the Duke of Buccleuch got a lot of money. So things are, I think, in this country run by and in the exclusive interests of elites, and I don't think any of the elites are in here. They are the bankers, they're the arms dealers, they are the public school boys, and it's a very gender specific thing because this is very much a boys club, and you can see how the boys all look after each other, whether that's this side of the Atlantic or the other side of the Atlantic. So we maybe need to see how we're going to address that. Now, energy is a reserve matter. It's dealt with by the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And the issues that we would be talking about here are called petroleum exploration and development licences. But what I did discover is that when the regulations covering that were put in place in the 90s, there was no specific mention of unconventional shale gas extraction. And a licence is not consent to drill. Mary published the letter she received, and I do have the one from the Energy Minister, Mr. Ewing. His office is directly next door to mine. There's 6 engineers through the intervening door. What he says, a lot of what he says is absolutely accurate, very accurate. And what he says is that another suite of permissions would be required. That's his phrase, another suite of permissions. And that's right. The local planning authority would have to take a view. And the planning authority isn't exclusively local authorities. For instance, the national parks can operate as planning authorities. I don't think they would necessarily take on that task. I think they'd defer to the local authority on it. And these would cover things like surface works associated with borehole construction, extraction operations, wellhead development, and of course there is the opportunity to reject these applications on planning grounds. Now, I'm a former member of a planning committee, and I have to say, as a councillor, it wasn't the most rewarding committee to be on, whether you were dealing with things people were very emotional about planning matters. But it wasn't just whether you liked or disliked. Your objections had to be on specific planning grounds. So I have to tell you, whether you're the Asda's or Tesco's of this world, they have lawyers who know exactly what the terms of any refusal can be. And they are very swift to appeal, because of course it's a bottomless pit of money that they would have to make more obscene profit. And local authorities are wary of that, and I would say governments are wary of that. And there was mention made of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, a very long name for a very, very nasty arrangement that just personifies all of this. So mention was also made of SEPA, and they would have a key role controlling environmental impacts from exploration and extraction of unconventional gas resources. And we've heard from Mary there the challenges there would be for SEPA with that. This is SEPA, like every other part of the public sector, has had to deal with diminishing resources. Finance, and of course the greatest percentage of your finance goes on staff, so reduce staff. Again, the predatory corporations are fully aware of that. The other permissions that would be required would be from the Health and Safety Executive, and also the coal authority for CBM. Now that's coal-based
Coal bed methane capture.
Thank
That's
you very much
what we're
indeed.
planning it for.
Yes. Beg your pardon. So the Scottish Government does have a policy on this, and you've heard it. I'll not read it out to you, because basically it's a bit of a fudge. They could. The question is, could they ban fracking? Well, I think they could. I think they could, and I think they should. Do I think they will? Well, I think, as has been said, there are many factors that determine political decision making. One of them is the electoral cycle. So we're not far short of May in political terms or political campaigning terms. I wouldn't necessarily, my view would be, I wouldn't necessarily expect to hear anything this side of the UK general election. Now, I just wonder to the extent to which, and Penny touched on this, the extent to which TTIP is in the back of people's minds around this particular decision. It's been referred to as the dash for gas, and we all like these sort of wee snappy phrases, but let's be quite clear what that did. That removed people's right to object or be notified about drilling under their homes, allowing firms to leave whatever substances they choose underground, and ignores overwhelming public opposition. Now clearly there's a political interest in this, and that again has been touched on by both the excellent previous speakers, and that is around continuity of energy supply. You know, any nation would look at that as being an important factor, but of course there's disputed levels of unconventional gas, just as there are of oil, and you need only see either side of the referendum campaign how suddenly the levels of oil changed the minute that was out of the way. So I think what we have to ask ourselves, and Penny said this very eloquently, and that's who says that, why do they say that, and based on what, and invariably on whose interests are they saying that. And I thought it was one fascinating thing when I was looking online last night there. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, said, and I quote, "Vast majority of reserves are unburnable. Global temperature rises are to be limited to 2 degrees Celsius." Now, we know that in relation to the oil. We know that in relation to the oil. And yes, there will be people who will be saying all sorts of things about we have exciting ways to minimise the damage. I think we have a global responsibility, and if this doesn't touch on our global responsibility and how we respond to the challenges of corporate dominance and bullying, I don't know how we're going to deal with it. Now, the UK government has moved more to a nuclear regime and ceding huge sums of money to other sovereign states who will deliver that from them. And of course the Scottish Government has an approach that favours renewables, and the two are not unrelated because of course subsidy is flowing from one to the other. Another thing that we might look at would be, or the political perspective might be on the tax take for this, because you know maybe, and I'm only being a wee bit devil's advocate, maybe if the tax take was so generous, so punitive, that there might be some ways of ameliorating the effects or offsetting the effects of. But the difficulty with that is, of course, George Osborne's told everyone he'll be offering the world's most generous shale tax regime. So if you're in any doubt, away you come, guys, away you come. Price, and the price has been touched on in the relationship between oil and this, and the overall global position is undisputable. A number of quotes that I picked up here. Cameron's claim fracking will lower gases is baseless, That's someone called Lord Stern. I have to say I didn't have the energy to find out which particular background. Lord Brown, if we're going for Lords, he said fracking will not reduce UK gas prices. George Osborne said in 2012, and I quote, "We do not want British families and businesses to be left behind as gas prices tumble on the other side of the Atlantic." But he had sort of softened a wee bit 2 years later, as saying that it not necessarily slash energy prices. I thought Ed Davey, and I think he's a Lib Dem, is he? He'll not be around long. He was, he would be. Yeah. They'll not have any effect on energy bills, and they'll not have any effect on energy bills for the reason that Finnie highlighted in relation to where we were, decades ago with North Sea oil, and that is the UK is part of a global energy market, and everything relates to the price of oil. Now we do live in a capitalist world, and we just have to get on with it, and that's not without its challenges. And there is absolutely no doubt that energy companies are a very powerful lobby, and none more so than INEOS. Quite frankly, they held two governments to ransom. They held the Scottish government and the UK government, and that was a very, very tense time. Very, very tense time, and I can understand the pressures that both these governments faced, because they were thinking, people are very keen to fill their tanks of petrol, and they're very keen to ensure that they can cook and things like that. But that was the personification of all that's wrong with capitalism. We had someone there who pays no tax, who treats his workforce atrociously, and the combination of getting off with a tax bill, and there's precedence for that, because the Vodafone got off with a very large bill, if you recall, and the way to do it apparently is to get taken out for a very expensive lunch by the head man at Her Majesty's Revenue of Customs, and then he waived the bill, an obscene sum of money. All these other companies that have received public money. £350 million project to import shale gas, purchased at 2 licences, and they tell us they're on track to drill in early 2016. Promising to hand over 6% of future shale gas revenues, 4% to the landowners, that's the clue and the like, and 2% to local communities. Now, if you were saying this in relation to the developing world and a predatory corporation from the developed world, you'd be talking about terms like inducement. It's a posh word for bribe, really, isn't it? This is the same thing that we've seen in relation to wind farms. Indeed, sometimes in the Highlands, communities pitched against each other, depending on which side of the hill they are and the benefits that come. He seemed to hack off the rest of his industry, because they were, it was 1% they were talking about. And very, very generously say that they estimate the total figure handed over as a result of this could be 2.5 billion, because clearly they're awash with generosity for landowners and the local public. We must keep challenging all the time who says that, based on what. And there are major difficulties with that, because we do have, and with the obvious exclusion of the volume edition of the Open Times, we have a media that isn't open-minded. It's a media which is a very, very narrow group of individuals with a very, very narrow focus. Mr. Swinnie, and I have a lot of regard for John Swinnie, I have to say, he said in relation to all this, there are a whole variety of complex issues that have to be wrestled with, and that is why we take an evidence-based and considered approach to all these issues. Well, that's a very good thing to say, but actually sometimes you have to make a decision, and sometimes you have to see who's interested in making that decision on behalf of. And we saw with the referendum debate, and I was very committed to the ESCOS and remain committed to Scotland having far more power, indeed being independent, and then getting the power further out to communities. We saw that there was an unwillingness to scare the horses, so that was the corporations, that was the supporters of the royal family, that was the banks and the like. And that's not quite how I see things. I was asked about what the Green Party's done in relation to this. Well, specifically the Green Party in Scotland commissioned some research. The UK government's plans to remove property owners' rights to object. 66% of the people who responded were believed that it should be devolved to Scotland. 19.7% the UK, and 13.7% said they didn't know. Now, I wouldn't condemn anyone for not knowing, because as my late mother would say, you only know what you know, and you only often know what you're told. And there's no one no one trying to share this information in an honest and even-handed manner. So that's why my fellow speakers here have an absolutely hugely important and valuable contribution to make to this debate. The Scottish Green Party has launched an anti-fracking campaign. They are the only party in Scotland that is committed to this position. I have to say, colleagues in the Green Party in England, and particularly the profile taken by Caroline Lucas, who is a crusader for many of the things that Pen's talked about, and a fine example to us all. And part of the action from the Scottish Green Party was the submission to the Smith Commission that devolution in energy policy, including powers over unconventional gas, should come to Scotland. And the reason for that was to allow for the more rapid advance towards renewable energy targets and climate change targets. And, this is the most important bit, and community control of local decision making. Because, you know, please don't give up on democracy quite yet. There are people trying their very best in very difficult circumstances to get democracy. There's challenges within the Scottish Parliament, which I'll not bore you with, which means that the 3 independent MSPs and the 2 Green MSPs don't get as called as often if they want, but I certainly make a pest of myself asking lots and lots of questions about lots of things. Alison Johnston, my Green MSP colleague, Alison said, if Scotland were to gain responsibility for licensing and pipeline permissions, I'd hope Holyrood would see sense and shut the door to fracking before it gets a foothold. There was an opportunity there. There was an opportunity. I think we just need to keep going at it. Now, the planning appeal was recalled on the 10th of October, and this was in relation to the Dart energy issue in central Scotland there. And from the press release, ministers will now take the decision over Dart Energy's appeal for the proposed development on coal-based methane production at a number of sites in Falkirk and Stirling council areas. The decision is in line with the government's cautious, considered and evidence-based approach to unconventional oil and gas extraction in Scotland. And commenting on the decision, Planning Minister Derek Mackay said, and I quote, "Ministers have recalled Dart Energy's planning appeal for proposed sites." The decision was taken in light of considerable public interest in these proposals, as well as its relevance to the implementation of the new recently updated Scottish planning policies. Scottish ministers therefore believe there's a national interest that would be best served by further scrutiny of these proposals. And I would fully concur with that. The challenge that's faced by people wishing to challenge either the state or indeed these corporations is the issue of expenses that was alluded to there, and prohibitive expenses. Now, since being elected, I've been trying to pursue an issue which has been picked up by our Friends of the Earth petition, which we dealt with in the Equal Opportunities Committee on Thursday, and that related to whether the Scottish Government complies with the Aarhus Convention, which basically is a convention to make sure that just because of lack of resources, the citizen isn't able to challenge these authorities. Now, there's not finite money, and there's all sorts of demand in the criminal justice system and indeed the civil legal aid system. But it's terribly important that we have that. And rather than, as I suspect, the desire to close that petition, we have kept it open and we're getting legal advice on the issue. So it's very much alive. We heard the name from Barry earlier on of Halliburton and a particular position they have in relation to unconventional gas extraction in the United States. Well, funnily enough, before the meeting convened, we were talking about Halliburton, because they're the perfect example of how capitalism can work very well. Because if you can get paid to blow the living daylights out of a place and then get paid to reinstate it, that's the perfect circle. And these are the sort of people who are involved in that pernicious trade. Penny touched on the issue of surveillance, and we're a very, very much surveyed society. I got replies yesterday to another series of questions I posed regarding surveillance in Scotland and the use of drones, and unless my information is incorrect, the first reply from the government is incorrect, and that was whether they have drones. I understand SEPA have them. It's not maybe a fairly innocent thing, but we need to understand. I've asked, and the subtleties are sometimes lost, whether police service from out with Scotland would require authorisation within Scotland, and whether the particular Scottish legislation would apply. That's a line of questioning I've asked, directly on camera to the Cabinet Secretary, because of course a lot of what we would understand is done in the name of the police perhaps has been done in the name of the security services, who take a very great interest in these. And again, are the security services doing that in the interest of the citizen? Well, to my mind, they're absolutely not. This is in the interest of corporations. So, it's wise to be cautious. But it's also very wise to please keep involved in the system. I think that there are a lot of people who would love us to give up in democracy, and I think when we saw the levels of participation in the independence referendum, that to me was very heartening. I was involved with the Radical Independence campaign, and as people will be aware, it targeted areas where people had felt disenfranchised for a number of reasons that have been alluded to. They'd felt excluded from the system. These people, for the first time, we knocked on the door and said to people, your views matter. Your views matter. And we turned around situations in one area I can think of where the turnout was ordinarily in the 30% and it was 78%. My fear, of course, is that perhaps given that the majority were voting one particular way, 3-1, that they felt that this wasn't worthwhile. But it's important to note that if people think something does matter to them, that their views matter, that it is relevant, they will participate. And I think we need to encourage that sort of approach. Patrick Harvey, Patrick's co-convener of the Scottish Green Party, and there was a convention of welcoming the new First Minister, and Patrick did that on behalf of the Green Independent Group, and then challenged Nicola Sturgeon to adopt appropriate positions both in relation to fracking and TTIP, and we'll see what comes of that. You know, the woman at the back there talking about Wales and the blight that's been visited on communities by coal extraction in the past there. That's the case in central Scotland too. And the coal mine restoration funds, and people will be about most recently there about the open cast mining and the bonds that were put in place there and not honoured. These are terrible situations. But of course the people who benefit from these profits aren't living in these areas. The people who benefit from these profits are living elsewhere. I'm keen that we all pay attention to the community empowerment bill that's coming up. If it's going to mean anything, it's going to mean that people genuinely act. It's very easy. Politicians get a lot of information from officials, and it's sometimes very easy just to go with the flow. The most important thing is to question. And I have to say, sometimes that's seen as being very negative. I think it's an absolute obligation to scrutinise proposals and say, why are you saying that and in whose interest? So, in summary, there were just a few points. This isn't a problem for someone else. This isn't nothing to do with the Highlands. We live on a very small planet. We want to be good global citizens, and we want to be seen acting responsibly. And if people in the Highlands want to have a regard to the rest of humanity, they will lend their support to people who are opposing this very, very intrusive and offensive procedure, and procedures indeed. Now, I did mention earlier about it's not that the Highlands aren't involved. The licence number 158, the operator is Caithness apparently, and this is the largest licensed area, 158.83 square kilometres off the east coast of Sutherland. So it's not a problem. We know that the energy lobby is a powerful lobby, and the renewables, the move with the subsidy regime last year, the UK government removed support for solar energy in the UK, and this week, in addition to the 5 million that Penny talked about, the government has introduced £450 million of tax breaks to help the North Sea companies at a time of plummeting prices, rising costs and steep output declines. But industry experts have warned, and I'm quoting here, the money is too little too late. Well, we've heard that nonsense before. I don't know of any impoverished leaders of industry, and we know that when people are presented on a television screen as honest brokers, they are not. We've heard this in relation to some academics and the sponsored work. the chair of the Oil and Gas Confederation, or whatever they call, who was wheeled out frequently at the time of the independence referendum, of course, is Mr. Osborne's father-in-law. You know, we do live in a world where a very small number of people have disproportionate sway, and they're afforded every opportunity to have that. You know, there's nothing wrong with profits. I like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. I like these shops. I like small businesses. That's the backbone of the Scottish economy. But there's profit and there's obscene profit, and the sums of money involved with these companies are horrendous, and it's all part of this neoliberal, powerful regime that we are faced with, and which, as Penny said, with TTIP, we're under real attack from. I have to say, it's my view that the Scottish government's hedging its bets. The UK government's very open. If there's a brass halfpenny in it for one of my mates, they're getting it. And we've seen that, whether that's the Royal Mayor, whether that's the privatisation of the health service south of the border. And you go and ask to see the minutes of some health committees, and you'll be told you can't get that. That's commercial in confidence. That's how bad things get. So I think we have to learn from the coal industry. People were very excited about a lot of that, and I think a lot of politicians are excited about where we are. This does require citizens' action, absolutely requires citizens' action, and to lobby. And there's an opportunity to lobby because I don't know whether the Scottish Green Party will put up candidates in some or every ward. That decision, I understand, is yet to be made. But it's important to push all the parties that are standing and the candidate for an individual position, because you know some of the constituencies are held by the party where this is taking place. The member is a member of the party of government, the Scottish National Party, and you know, so Angus MacDonald, who's working very hard on behalf of his community there, people will be persuaded by the electorate. People should be persuaded by the electorate. This isn't something that should be a party whip that's determining the future of communities and the future of our environment. So I think it's time for the Scottish Government to give very positive signals, and signals that reflect the people's views and reflect the best interests of our communities and our environment, and that is to have no fracking. Thank you very much.